Have you ever considered writing a book? Many people think they'd like to write a book one day and they never get around to it because that task feels too daunting. And I was one of those people until I learned how to use AI properly. And I realized actually this is going to be a whole lot easier now because of AI. And so 2 months ago, I decided I'm going to write a book, and here it is. This book is now live on Amazon. I'm a published author, and it's already helped open doors for consulting work and speaker opportunities. The whole process took 6 weeks from start to finish, and it was a whole lot easier than I expected, but also a lot more fun than I expected. And that's because I used AI to assist me with each step. So in this episode, I'm going to explain the exact process I used from planning, writing, editing to publishing. It's a really efficient and simple process that anyone can use, and I will run you through it step by step. So if you're interested in publishing a book but weren't sure where to start, this is the episode for you. And I promise you that once you see this process I've used and how simple it is, you'll have the confidence and also the motivation you need to get that book idea out of your head and onto paper. So let's get into it. Welcome to My Way or the AI Way. I'm Scott Davison, and I launched this podcast almost 12 months ago as part of my mission to master AI. And I've been learning in public by trying different use cases each week and sharing those on the podcast. And this one by far has been my biggest project, my biggest use case, writing and publishing a book. So today I want to show you how I did that and how AI was able to assist with that. I'm going to go through this step by step, and there are 6 steps in the process. Number 1 is planning. Number 2 is how to train your AI to sound like you. Number 3 is the drafting process, so drafting the manuscript. Then I'll show you how to edit that with AI, how to go about laying it out, and finally, how to publish the book. I'll be going through these steps in quite a bit of detail, but if you want to jump ahead to any of the particular stages, you can use the chapter markers below. Let's start with step 1, planning. Now, whatever project you're working on, investing some time up front on the plan is always a good idea, in my opinion. And I'm a natural planner. I guess if you're writing a fiction novel, perhaps you could just sit down and sort of write it by the seat of your pants. And that could work for some people. But I think for most of us, having a clear plan up front is really going to help, particularly when you're using AI to assist with the process. Having a clear plan documented up front is critical and really important because it's the plan that gives AI the context it needs to help you deliver this project. And with AI, context is everything. But what needs to go into a book plan? If you've never even written a book before, where do you start? Well, guess who knows the answer? That's right, AI. You can simply ask AI to help you write the book plan, and this is the method that I used. For the planning phase, I used ChatGPT. This has been my primary AI tool, so it already had a lot of context about me, which is important and helpful. But it also has some really key features which I like about ChatGPT, and I'll show you those now as I talk you through this process. But just be aware you could use whichever AI tool you prefer, and they all work in a similar way. But I use ChatGPT, and this is how I went about it. Okay, so I'm going to screen share here, and I'll talk you through the exact process I used and some of the features I used within ChatGPT to help with the planning. Now, one of these features which is really important, and all the AI tools have something similar, it's called projects. So whenever I'm starting a new project, I start by creating a new project within ChatGPT. You can see here I've created a project for the book, and that's one place where I can contain all the conversations I'm having related to this book. And that's really helpful, firstly, to have things organized, but also you can provide specific instructions and reference documents related to this specific project. And that's really important, and I'll show you how that works as we go through it. So definitely create a new project for your book, and that's going to be the home for all your conversations related to this book that you're working on. So as you can see, I've had a lot of different chats going related to the book, and they're all in this one place. And if we go back and look at the original one where I was working on the book plan, here it is, book plan creation, I can show you this process I used to write the plan for the book. So let's go right back to the start of that. And you can see my original prompt here. I'll zoom in on that. In this case, very much just a conversational prompt, and I'm using a lot more of these days. So I simply said, I'm starting a new project. I want to write a book about my way or the AI way. And to start with, I want to write a plan for the book. So I want you to help me write a plan, interview me, and ask me questions until you've got enough information to write a summary of the plan for the book. And we'll use that as the guiding star for this book. Now, this interview technique is really effective, and I use this a lot with AI, particularly for brainstorming and planning and strategy. And you effectively ask it to take on the role of a consultant, and it then asks you the questions to help you formulate that plan. And this is a really effective way of working. And I like this way of working. I have the questions in the chat. I can read the questions, but then the feature I really love about ChatGPT, which I use a lot for this sort of thing, is when I want to respond to these questions, rather than having to type my answers, I use this microphone icon, dictate, down on the right next to the chat window, and you open that up and you can just start speaking in a natural voice the way I am now, and it's recording that. And that allows you to answer in a much more natural way. You can be as verbose as you like. You can have ums and ahs, and it just is recording that. I find ChatGPT to be incredible in terms of this voice recognition. And then when you're ready, you just hit the arrow button and it submits that exactly like as if you had typed that into the chat window. So it's the two features. One is asking AI to take on the role to interview you. And then secondly, using that dictation, the microphone icon here, to respond using natural voice and getting it to dictate your answers. Really effective way to go through this planning process. So eventually you get through all of the questions. It's now got enough information. And I say, okay, go ahead and put that into a canvas. And it puts it into this canvas format, which is basically like having a live document that you can then go through and make further edits if you want to. But once you're happy with it, you can just download that as a PDF or a Word document. So let me show you what that plan actually looks like. I've opened up the Word document here so you can understand what ends up in a plan. But it's basically, what's this, 3 or 4 pages, I guess, but quite a succinct plan that captures all of that information and thought process that we'd gone through over a couple of hours. And it's captured it in this plan. So the first thing it's got here is the purpose and the vision. And this is obviously an important part of any plan. This is about understanding your why. So why are you writing this book? That's really important for you to understand because that's going to keep you motivated. But it's also important for the AI to understand what the purpose of the book is, because that's going to help it guide you to deliver on that promise. The second section of the plan is the audience and the positioning. And this is probably the key part. This is having in mind who you're writing the book for. This is core to any book plan. Who's the audience? And the more detail you can give it around who you're trying to speak to, the better job it can do of helping you write to that audience. So this doesn't just apply to a book plan. This is pretty much any project or any content that you're producing with AI. Tell it who you're trying to speak to, and it'll do a better job of addressing them. The third section was this core idea and angles, and this was where I spent quite a bit of time going back and forth, fleshing this out. And this evolved as I continued writing the book. I actually went back and kept updating the plan because some of this will evolve as you start writing. But it's good to have an idea of what are the key big ideas you're trying to cover in the book and any core concepts that you want to get across. So my big idea is that you can't stop the AI wave, but you can learn to surf it. And that's sort of a metaphor that I use throughout the book. And that the best way to learn is by doing. So this was designed to be a very practical, use case-based book. And there were sort of 4 pillars that we worked out. The first one was this idea of the AI wave and having the right mindset. The second one was this behavioral shift. So the whole concept behind the podcast, My Way or the AI Way, which is also the name of the book, is that you need to challenge yourself to try doing things the new way, and that often involves unlearning an old habit. So that idea of habit change was a core pillar. The idea of learning by doing, that's key to this book. And then finally, using real life practical examples. They were sort of the 4 pillars that are part of this plan. Fourth section was structure and format. So I had already sort of thought about how I wanted to structure this book, and I was basing it on the same use cases I've been covering on the podcast. And I thought it would be very easy to make those use cases into a book. And I was able to come up with 52 different use cases for the book, and we sort of grouped them into different benefits around saving time, saving money, being more creative. So these would be the chapters, and within each chapter, I would have, 4 or 5 use cases. So that worked really well as a structure. And that also worked in terms of my workflow, that I could work through it chapter by chapter. So the structure is an important thing to have a think about up front, I think. The fifth thing it asked me for were these scope and practicalities. And for me, really, this was just an experiment. So my main objective was to try and get it done before the end of the year. And I was starting in November. So that gave us a really clear timeline, which I think is really helpful. If you are taking on a project like this, you want to time box it and you want to have a clear deadline, because otherwise you could just go on forever. And often people do, they'll sit on a book for months or years. So I found having a clear deadline worked really well. And it actually worked really well because AI was also able to act as a bit of an accountability partner. And a few times I was sort of going down that trap of perfectionism and sort of overdoing things. And it would say, hey, I think this is good enough, and we're trying to get this done by this date, so let's move on to the next thing. So having the deadline was really important, and I'd encourage you to do that if you're writing a book, and it included that in the plan. But that is the plan that I started with, and I was able to upload that to AI, and it would use that each time to keep us on track as we work through the project. So let's move on to step 2 now that you've got your plan. And this is a really important step, which is how do you train the AI to sound like you? And again, the more context you can give it, the better. This is something I've used not just for the book, but when working with clients or when working on any content-based project. I usually create a tone of voice document that helps it write in the right tone of voice for you or for your brand. And the book is the perfect example for that. So I'll go back to my screen share here. And again, this is all within the book project that I had created here. And you'll see it's way back here. One of the first things I was working on was this tone of voice chat. So I had a different chat conversation related to tone of voice. That makes it easy to go back and find that later. And this was one of those documents that I continued to update as I went through it. But if we go right back to the original chat, I'll show you the first prompt I used to help come up with the tone of voice. And this is the sort of prompt you could use to create your own tone of voice document. In this case, I used a bit more of a structured prompt where you give it the context, you explain the role, and you give it the task. So I'll show you the exact prompt I used. The context I said is, as you know, I'm about to start writing a book. I want to use AI to help draft it, but I want it to be written in my tone of voice. And in my case, I have 3 ways I'd like you to get a feel and an understanding of my tone of voice. So firstly, I previously had a blog called The Dad Train. It was like a self-improvement blog for dads. And I spent a lot of time writing those articles. So I asked it to go and analyze those articles to get an understanding of how I write. Secondly, I have the transcripts from my podcast episodes where I'm talking in a more conversational way, and I wanted to look at those examples as well to get an understanding of how I speak. And then finally, I wanted it to, again, interview me and ask questions to get a better understanding of my tone of voice. And based on all of that, your role is to act as a tone of voice expert and conduct the above 3 tasks, and then compile a document that outlines my tone of voice very thoroughly, so it can be given to AI models to help them write like me. And the task, does this make sense? If so, where would you like to start? So again, I'm putting it back on AI to ask me any additional questions. And you can see here, it's done great. That makes sense. I love this plan. I'll go through these steps. I'll do the blog analysis. I'll then look at the podcast transcripts, and then we'll do a live interview to get some more information. And at the end of it, you'll get a thorough Scott Davison tone of voice guide that you can hand to an AI model or a human. Where do we start? When you're ready, post in the blog links. And that's what I did. So in my case, I had a blog. That seemed like a really good place because I had a lot of written work that I already put there. But if you didn't have a blog, you could use whatever context or documents you have that have been written in your tone of voice. So these could just be as simple as emails that you've written, or they could be reports that you've written, or articles, or anything you've done that you feel represents you or your brand. You can provide it that as context. So I just simply gave it this link. So it was able to go through very quickly and analyze all of those and identify patterns. And I'll show you how that worked. So it went off, it read the articles, and it's really good at consuming lots of information and then identifying patterns. So it was able to identify, my style, the type of humor I use with this self-deprecating humor, the fact that I like to support things with research, and also that I use a lot of quotes, that I use structured sort of step-by-step bullet points. I really like that style of writing. An empathetic voice, use of rhetorical questions, which I hadn't realized, and this idea of sort of writing in an inclusive way. So I tend to use we rather than I. So I picked up on that. So already it was getting a really good feel of my tone of voice based on that. It then asked me to go ahead and give it the podcast transcripts, which you can see here. I've just uploaded a bunch of different episodes, transcripts from the podcast, ones that I felt sort of represented my tone of voice. I probably overdid it here. I gave it a bunch more, but the more context you can give it, the better, and it never really tires. So based on all of those transcripts, it was able to pick up on some of the speech patterns, I guess, or the way I talk, because I really wanted this book to be quite conversational. I wanted it to feel like someone was listening to me talk by it. So it now had my written examples, it had my transcripts of my spoken examples, and then finally we moved into going through its additional questions. And it asked some really insightful questions around, my personality, my purpose, teaching, coaching style, etc. And again, I just went through and answered these questions in an interview format using the dictation mode. And eventually we got to a point where it's great. We now have the tone of voice guide. Again, it put it into a canvas, and you can see here, in this case, it's a one-page document that captures all of that. What's the purpose and the personality? What are some of the voice mechanics? This teaching and coaching style, a bit around injecting personal stories. I really wanted to have that, in a world where AI can generate content, it's the personal stories that give the content authenticity. So I picked up on that, sharing vulnerabilities, and then some of the practical details. This is where I continued to add more things as we went through, but these were some starting things around do's and don'ts. So what are the sort of phrases I do use, but what are some of the things that I avoid? Having do's and don'ts in your tone of voice document is really important. And if you can give it references of what sort of work you like and you're trying to sound like. So in my case, we worked out that James Clear and Tim Ferriss were sort of practical, discipline-based authors that were similar to my writing style, and it's come up with a really good document. And again, once you're happy with that, you just download that and you then add it to the project. And as you can see, that's the second document that I uploaded to the project, which is the tone of voice guide. And they're the two documents you need to get started on this book, is your plan and your tone of voice guide. And that gives it all the context it needs to help make sure you keep this project on track to your audience and your objectives, and also help it to write in a way that sounds like you. And the advantage of putting those into a project is that whenever you start a new conversation within that project and you ask it a question, before it answers any question, it goes off and reads those documents every time. So it's always starting with the right context before it responds. So you've done your upfront work, which is the plan and the tone of voice. Now it's time to start writing the book. So let's move on to that step, which is step 3, drafting the book. And again, I'll screen share here and show you how I went about this within ChatGPT. I sort of worked through it chapter by chapter. That worked as a really good workflow for me because it allowed me to keep it structured, but it also gave me little sprints that I could work on one chapter at a time. And you can see for each one, I started a new conversation, firstly to keep it organized, but also breaking it up into different chats is really important, because some of these can get quite long and you can actually reach the context window limits. So having it broken up into chapters or into use cases is a really good way of structuring it. Now, there's one other step I used, which I'll tell you about, which I think is really helpful, which is this chat here, new chapter prompt. The reason I did this is I realized I was going to be, for each new conversation, each new chapter, I was going to be using the same process. And the process I wanted to use was that I would upload context, in this case, the transcript from the podcast episode related to that use case, and I would use that as the basis for the chapter. and I would then get AI to ask me more information, ask me questions. Once we had all that, we would then draft the first version. So this was a process and a prompt that I was going to be using each time. So I asked ChatGPT to help me write that prompt. This is another really effective technique if you're doing something important like deep research or a prompt that you're going to be reusing, or even a custom GPT. You get the AI to write the prompt for you. And you can see here, I've given it the context. I've asked it to take on the role of drafting the prompt, and it's gone ahead and written a really long prompt here based on the process that we workshopped. And then all I have to do each time is copy that prompt. And when I'm starting a new chat or a new chapter to work on, I would just paste that prompt in. And again, this is something that actually evolved a bit as I went through. I refined that prompt, but it meant I had a starting point each time and I didn't have to repeat the instructions. So that was a really effective method that I'd recommend. And then just quickly to show you how that works, let's go and have a look at one of the chapters I'm working on here, which is chapter 5. So this is the chat window I used for chapter 5. And if we go right back to the start of that chat, you'll see that I start by pasting in that exact prompt that we worked on there. Paste that in and it comes back with exactly what I asked it to do, which is, okay, I've understood the prompt. Let's start. What do you want to work on today? And I would then go ahead and upload the transcript for that particular use case, which in this chapter 5 was all about leadership. And I'd already done a podcast episode talking about how to use AI as a leader. And I had 5 different use cases in that podcast episode. So I just uploaded the transcript from that and said, right, let's start with that. And then ask me some questions to sort of get more out of it. And again, we go through that process of it asking me questions, me answering. As you can see, really long answers here because I'm using the dictation mode, so I can be quite verbose. And once we're both happy that we've got enough, I ask it to go ahead and start drafting the content for that chapter. And you can go back and forward, make tweaks, and eventually you get to a point where you are happy that you'd covered all the content for that chapter. And this could take a few hours. And again, once you're happy with it, you put it into a canvas. And I've now got that chapter. It's actually chapter 5 in a canvas that I can download and save elsewhere. And I was always doing that just to be safe because it can be a bit flaky sometimes. It will lose content. So once you've got something you're happy with, make sure you grab a copy of that and save it as a Word doc or an RTF document. And that's how I went about drafting it. And it was actually quite quick to write the initial draft, the manuscript. So I had 8 chapters. I had an introduction, and I was planning to have a final thoughts type chapter, like a conclusion chapter. What I chose to do was work through the 8 chapters first and then write the introduction chapter once I'd written that, which worked really well because you've got more context at that point. But I basically just went through chapter by chapter, use case by use case, using that prompt, getting it to ask me more information, and then writing the first draft. And I tried not to spend too much time wordsmithing it at that point. I just wanted to really focus on getting that first manuscript written. I was aiming for 8 chapters. I was aiming for, I think, 30,000 words. It turned out being somewhere in the 20s, but that was quite a lot of content. And I probably did that initial draft in the equivalent of 1 week of maybe each day, 2 to 3 hours of focused work. So I'd get through 1 or 2 chapters a day. So writing that initial draft was actually pretty quick and pretty efficient. And that's the bit that usually takes people months or sometimes years to do, is to actually get the manuscript. And any book coach you speak to will say, first goal is to get your manuscript drafted. Doesn't need to be perfect. You're going to edit it later. Get that done. And that's a big achievement. So to be able to do that in less than 2 weeks using this process was really efficient. And you've already broken the back of the project. You've got the manuscript written. So once you've got your first draft written, it's now time to move on to step 4 in the process, which is editing. And when I looked at that first draft, I was reasonably happy with it, but it still sounded a little bit AI and there was a lot of repetition and it was a first draft, exactly like you'd expect. So this is where I turned to another strategy, which is to use different AI models to test the work of another one. Now, ChatGPT was fantastic for the planning and even the drafting because I was able to use that interview technique and the dictation mode, which I really like in ChatGPT. But in terms of actually writing content, the model that's generally at this stage, and they're always changing, regarded as the best for writing is Claude. So I thought I'll actually use Claude to do the editing process, and that worked really well. I hadn't used Claude before, so I set up an account with Claude, and Claude was really good at writing, much better than ChatGPT. And if you haven't used Claude, it really is like working with a different person. It has a different personality. I think it's felt like a bit smarter and a bit more balanced in a lot of ways. And certainly for writing code, Claude is clearly the number one. And I think for writing copy, particularly longer type copy, Claude generally does a better job at it. So it was perfect as the editor now that I had my initial draft. So if you haven't used Claude before, let me just quickly show you how that works. It's very similar. Obviously, all of these models are pretty similar. So it's a main chat window, and it has projects just like ChatGPT has projects, and the projects work in exactly the same way. So I was able to create a new project for the book, and I was able to jumpstart that because I already had my plan and my tone of voice document, which I uploaded. So I didn't have to go through that whole process of training the model again. I already had all the context that I was able to easily import from ChatGPT into Claude and give it a head start. And you can see here, I've added those to those projects. So slightly different interface, but it works much the same way. And within Claude, I would use much the same process where I would have a new conversation or a new chat window for each chapter, and I would just work through it chapter by chapter and refine the process as I went. But if we have a look at this as an example, chapter 5, and this is really the process I landed on, which worked really well as an editing process. And this is where you're asking AI to take on the role of an editor. So in the drafting step, you're really asking AI to act like a ghostwriter and to help interview you and put your words onto paper. In step 2, you're asking it to take on more of a critical role and to be a editor. And the way that works really well is I would just upload the draft, chapter 5. I would ask it to review that and start by giving it a rating. So you're asking Claude to rate the work of ChatGPT, and of course, it's always going to mark it somewhere between a 6 and an 8. In this case, it was a 6.5. But more importantly, it will identify key issues that it thinks you need to fix. So it's gone through and identified things that are in the tone of voice document or in the plan that it feels I'm not reflecting in this draft, and really good list of things that you might want to think about doing. And it will often group those into high priority and low priority. Here you go, priority fixes. These are the most important ones. These are the medium ones. And maybe I'm trying to get it from a 6.5 to a 9 out of 10. And you can work through those issues that's identified. So I'm actually having a few technical problems with the screen sharing there. So I'll stop screen sharing, but I'll just talk you through what Claude was really good at in terms of editing. And some of the things it was really good at picking up on were in the plan, I had said that I wanted to include personal stories, and it would often say, hey, this use case could do with a bit more vulnerability or a bit more of a personal story. And it would ask me if I had a story that related to that use case. So that helped to add a bit of personality and polish. And it took what sounded a bit more AI written and very generic by ChatGPT and really made it sound more like me and gave it more personality. But Claude also did a much better job of then writing it in a way that read less like ChatGPT tends to write in a way that reads a bit like a LinkedIn post. I think that's how a lot of people are using it and probably how it's been trained. Claude managed to write it in a much more book-like manner, in my opinion. So it worked really well as an editor. But for an important project, one where you want to invest the time, it can be a really good strategy to use one model to test the work of another, because each of these LLMs have different personalities effectively. So it's a bit like using two different people to get two different perspectives on something. And it's a good way to get that extra polish on your work. And in this case, I use ChatGPT for the initial draft, and then I use Claude for the editing and the final version. And that worked really well. So let's move on to step 5, which is laying out. I've now got my final version of the book polished and written and edited. At this stage, I've just been doing that within Claude and then pasting it into Google Docs. So I sort of had the final version. But how do you actually go about making that into a book? I had no idea about that. So again, this is where I turned to ChatGPT to coach me on how to lay out that for a book. And it worked really well because it has all the knowledge of how to publish a book. And we identified that the best way for me to do that was to use Amazon KDP, so Kindle Digital Publishing Platform. And it was able to quickly say, look, the best way to do it is to do it in Microsoft Word. Now, I have Microsoft Word. I don't use it a lot, but it could coach me through how to set up the file, what page size I would typically use for a book, what font size, even what fonts, as well as any of the features within Microsoft Word that I needed to find. It would just talk me through that step by step. So this is often how I'm using AI. It's like a live IT support or coach. So I have Microsoft Word opened in one tab or one window. I've got ChatGPT in the other window, and it's talking me through it step by step. So it was a pretty simple process in Microsoft Word to lay it out in the 6x9 format that's used for most business books. And I then had a Word document with the final version. And I basically did two versions, which you'll see when we get to the final step. One was an ebook version and the other was a print version. So that layout step probably took a day or two. That's the sort of formatting bit where you can spend a bit of time, but it was much quicker because I had ChatGPT talking me through it. So even though I hadn't used Word for quite a while, I was able to figure out how to do things. And the key there was just to keep it pretty simple. So I didn't overdo it. I didn't want to have illustrations in the book. I would have burned a lot of time on that, but I needed to have it laid out professionally. And you want to put a bit of thought into, particularly with the paperback, where the page breaks are going. And that process worked really well. So that's the layout step. And then finally, you've got your book laid out in Word. It's really how do you publish that? And there's basically two options there. The traditional method, which is to use a professional publisher. And obviously, if you're Richard Branson and you're publishing your book, then you would go through a professional publisher. But for a lot of us who are just publishing these books more as a business tool, you can actually do it yourself. Self-publishing is really easy. And the best platform to do that is Amazon. It's called KDP, Kindle Digital Publishing Platform. And that was the process that ChatGPT had recommended. And that's the one I used, and it was a really simple process. So I'll talk you through that really quickly so you can see how easy it is to actually publish the book once you've got it. And again, I'll just quickly screen share here. Hopefully it works this time. So the platform I used is called KDP, kdp.amazon.com, and you can log in basically with your Amazon login or set one up if you don't have one. And whilst it's a bit dated in terms of the interface, it's pretty simple to use. And again, ChatGPT knows all the ins and outs. So any quirks that are in this platform, as all software has, ChatGPT knows how to work around those. And you just go in here and you can upload the Word document. So for your ebook, Kindle ebook, and also for the paperback, and it will take you through the steps. I'll show you quickly how this looks. So you enter the title, you enter information around the author, you give it a description that will appear, and then you can choose which categories you want it to go in, as well as some keywords. Step 2 is where you actually upload the content. So you just upload the Word document, and you can also attach a cover. It has a template you can use to create a cover, or you can create one yourself in Canva and just attach that. And then the final step is where you determine where you're going to make the book available on Amazon and what your pricing is. And they've got a pretty simple model. So in this case, it's the ebook, and they give you 70% commission. So whatever price you charge, they keep 30% of the ebook. In the case of the paperback, they keep 40% and you get 60%. And you can basically choose your pricing. It gives you some recommendations. Generally, you want to have the ebook quite cheap as your sort of entry level, accessible. And then your paperback, you've got to cover your printing costs and usually have a bit more on there because there's a lower margin. And that's it. You do the same process for both the paper book and the paperback. Again, in terms of the paperback, just to show you how the pricing on that works, because this is what I was most impressed with, is how cheap it was to print it. And you can see here, it shows you the printing costs. This is what I wanted to show you because I was not sure how this would work. And the way Amazon works is they do print on demand. So there's no stock. You don't have to print off thousands of these and have them sitting around going out of date and then realize you've got a typo and you've got to go and fix them all. They simply print on demand. So as soon as someone orders one, they print it and send them to it. And I was amazed. It gets printed and delivered within 48 hours. And the printing cost for my book, which was about 120 pages, you can see in Australian dollars, $5.17 is the cost of the actual printed version. or $2.50 US. So that's pretty cost effective, I thought, particularly for a print on demand model. And it means I can charge anything above that amount, and I'll be making some sort of profit. So that's Amazon KDP and how it works. It's a pretty simple platform. I found it quite easy to use, very cost effective. I'll stop sharing there to make sure we don't have any more technical glitches. But some of the advantages of using Amazon for self-publishing like this is, firstly, when you upload that first version of the paperback, you can get a proof sent to you. And you just get one proof. It costs the amount of printing, so $5 plus postage. And that was really helpful because you can actually see the book, touch and feel it. And I was able to go through it and say, okay, I needed to change a bit of the formatting. The font size I'd used was a bit too small, so I bumped that up. And you can do that based on that proof. But then once it's live and you make it live, obviously it's available on Amazon for people to order at whatever price you set. In my case, I set that at $15 Australian for the paperback and $5.99 for the ebook. But if you want to order copies for yourself, you can order author copies and you just pay the print cost plus postage. That's where you go ahead and you order, a box of 30 books, which I did, and I've started giving those to people I'm meeting with. So there's two ways I can do that. Either I print off the books, send them to mine, and I can hand them out. Or if I've got people I want to send a book to, maybe a potential client or a partner or someone who I want to give a free copy to, I can order that on Amazon, one copy, print on demand, at $5 Australian, $2.50 US, and then send it directly to them from Amazon. And they've got it within 2 days, delivered from Amazon, for basically the cost of the book plus postage. So it's a pretty cost-effective way for me to get these books out to people. And for most of us, if you're writing a book like this for sort of business purposes, to build authority or to open up doors, you're probably going to be giving away more books than you're selling. So to have a really simple, cost-effective, but more important, really simple way of sending books to people rather than me having to go to the post office each time, I really found that very valuable. And it makes Amazon a really good option for most of us. So that's the process I use. The book is now live on Amazon. I should just quickly show you that. It's called My Way or the AI Way. It's now live on Amazon. People can go here and order it. And it's available, obviously, in international markets as well because of Amazon's reach. So there it is. I'm now a published author with a book live on Amazon. Go ahead and check it out. And as I say, I've been sending copies to clients and potential partners. And it's already opened up a couple of opportunities for new business and speaker opportunities. So I'm going to be presenting at a conference next month, and we can just print off 30 or 40 copies of those and give one to each of the delegates. And so it's a really effective tool. Think of it a bit like an expensive business card, but it's a really good way to get your brand and your personality in front of people. And that's where the value is for me. Obviously, it was a bit of a project and an experiment. But now that I've got a book, I can use it as a way to introduce myself and to get consulting work or speaker opportunities. And I think for most of us, that's the value of the book. You're unlikely to make much money in terms of book sales. By the time Amazon take their cut and you take out printing, I'm making a couple of dollars per sale. So unless I sell 1 million books, I'm not going to be making a lot of money from the book sales. But hopefully where the value comes in terms of the financial return on investment, it's from the money you make from the opportunities that it opens up in terms of business opportunities. But if you just want to have a book for the sake of publishing a book, pretty cost-effective way to do it. You don't have to print lots of copies, and it's available there on Amazon if people want to find it. And who knows, you might end up in a top seller list at some point and become a top-selling author. So there it is. I hope you found that useful. I know that was a bit of a long one, but I really wanted to go through each step and explain it in detail. A reminder of the process I've used there. So step 1 was planning, starting with your book plan, which is your why, your purpose, and your core audience. Step 2 was training the AI to sound like you, so giving it context and references and teaching it how to write in your tone of voice. Then you move into drafting. I use that process of giving it context and then getting it to interview me. ChatGPT was the tool I used for that. Step 4 was editing. So this is where you can use a different model. In my case, I use Claude to edit the work of ChatGPT, and you get it to take on the role of a sub-editor. Step 5 was the layout in Microsoft Word, using AI to coach you on how to do that. And then step 6 is publishing, so uploading to Amazon KDP and self-publishing the book. Very simple process. Hopefully you found that useful to go through it step by step. And that's a process anyone can use to write a book in a similar way to what I've done here. The next step, which you may want to consider, and I'm probably going to do next as a future episode, is if you want to create an audio book of the same one, you can use AI to help with that. So I might try that next and I'll share that on a future episode. But for now, those are the 6 steps to get your book live. Now, if you want any more information or if you have any questions on any of those steps, please reach out, put them in the comments below. Love to give you more information if you've got questions. And if you're enjoying this content, please make sure you follow this channel for future episodes. And I guess finally, if you want to, if you're interested in this book or you just want to see what the end product is, please go ahead and order it on Amazon. I'll put the links in the show notes below. You can obviously order the ebook or the paperback. And if you are thinking of doing this, maybe order the paperback so you can see what the end product looks like, because I was quite impressed with the quality of the printing. But I'd also be interested to get your feedback when you read it on whether you think it sounds like me or whether it feels like AI has written it. I've given that book to a number of people who know my work well, and the feedback I've got is, yeah, it sounds exactly like we're having a conversation with you. That's music to my ears because that was the goal. I hope you enjoyed that episode, and I hope, as promised, that you now, if you are thinking of writing a book, you now have the confidence and also the motivation to go ahead and do it. And if so, good luck. Let me know how you go, and I'd love to check out your book when it's ready. Thank you for joining me on this journey to learn more about AI. I'm Scott Davison, and this is My Way or the AI Way.